It wasn't really a defense. He went out there, he made a rare public appearance in front of the media to talk about this bill that's really important to the president. It goes to some of his core priorities, and answer questions from the media. And when he was confronted with some difficult and, yes, adversarial questions from CNN's Jim Acosta, we heard there, he dodged, he ducked, and he didn't defend. For example, Jim Acosta said, well, can you explain your English language merit-based system that you're proposing? Like why English? And we heard Stephen Miller go, our youth, you don't understand who speaks English from the world. You're accusing people of only Great Britain and Australia of speaking English, and you don't really understand world history. And it was just like, not necessarily alternative facts, but more like creating an alternative reality there.
Yeah, I did think to myself when I was listening to the back and forth, well, we really didn't get any new information there, but I suppose it was entertaining to a certain degree.
Well, yeah.
So, this is not necessarily a layup, or is it? I mean, on Capitol Hill now, what are you hearing in terms of whether or not this bill even has a chance?
Sure, that it doesn't. Two reasons for that. One, Democrats can still block legislation. The whole reason we saw the healthcare debate happen without Democratic support was Republicans were trying to pass this under a budget tool called reconciliation, and so it relates to the budget. They can't do that with a bill like immigration, and they can't do that later this fall. And so Democrats have the power in the Senate to block this legislation by filibustering it. So that's that. But there's a second reason I don't think this bill, as proposed right now, has a shot, and that's because some conservatives have made the case against it. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, of course a frequent Trump critic, came out and said, I think this would actually hurt South Carolina's economy, and pointed to an array of economists from all different political spectrums who argue that, the U.S. doesn't need to limit its legal migration. It needs to up it right now, because as baby boomers retire, we need more people in the workforce. We're retiring more people than we're actually getting into the workforce right now.
So let's switch things up a little bit. We want to talk about the Russia sanctions bill. The president signed it yesterday. Begrudgingly, he made sure that we all knew that he was not in favor of signing this. And then, of course, he started tweeting. I'm going to read you one of his tweets. Our relationship with Russia is at an all-time and very dangerous low. You can thank Congress, the same people that can't even give us health care. What is up with that? Once again, sort of slamming Congress. What do you make of his argument?
Sure. Well, actually, diplomatic experts I spoke to on Russia and Eurasia tell me that the president has a very legitimate beef here with Congress implementing sanctions for him. And that's because, yes, under the Constitution, both the president and Congress can levy sanctions, but Congress requires an act of law to take it away. The president can just wave his or her pen and say, all right, no more sanctions for you. And diplomacy does require a much more flexible approach that's more suited to the president's power of giving and taking away sanctions. But that being said, Congress took action knowing that, and knowing this would make the president upset. And this is really underscoring that Republicans in Congress especially do not trust the president to get tough on Russia, and they don't trust him to get tough on Iran and North Korea. I mean, bottom line, they don't trust him on foreign policy, so they've decided they had to take action.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Amber, the Washington Post has just posted transcripts of the president's first phone calls with the president of Mexico and the prime minister of Australia. Anything stand out to you?
A lot. I had the chance to read these transcripts just before coming on air. Listen, what I hear, and again, these are calls that the president made, just after he got inaugurated, trying to get to know these world leaders. Both the Australian and Mexican leaders came across extending a warm hand of friendship despite all of the drama during the campaign. And what I heard was a president that sounded exactly like the guy who descended the escalator 2 years ago in Trump Tower and said Mexican immigrants are criminals and rapists and drug dealers. He was obsessed with both these presidents allowing in people from their countries into the U.S. and whether they would be bad people. He said to the Australian Prime Minister, who was trying to get Trump to agree to a previous deal to allow 1,200 immigrants into the U.S. Are these guys going to be the next Boston Marathon bomber? I don't understand. Like they're not going to grow up to be the local milkman, is I think a direct quote from the president. It's just the president you saw on the campaign trail is the president that we saw behind closed doors right after he got inaugurated, just obsessed with incoming migration into the U.S.
Well, it's certainly what a lot of people supported him for, so I'm sure when they read the transcripts, they'll be pleased with what they read. Speaking of the president of Mexico, I also have to ask you about some criticism that the president is facing over 2 separate phone calls that he says happened, but other parties say never happened at all. Sarah Huckabee Sanders defended Mr. Trump yesterday. Let's listen to what she had to say. We'll talk about it on the other side.
On Mexico, he was referencing the conversation that they had at the G20 summit, where they specifically talked about the issues that he referenced in terms of the Boy Scouts. Multiple members of the Boy Scout leadership following his speech there that day congratulated him, praised him. They were actually direct conversations, not actual phone calls.
So he lied. He didn't receive.
I wouldn't say it was a lie. It was. That's pretty bold accusation. It's the conversations took place. They just simply didn't take place over a phone call. That he had them in person.
So just to remind people, what the president had said on 2 separate occasions was that the president of Mexico, we had a conversation with him on the phone in which the president of Mexico praised him for his border policies and that there had been a dramatic reduction in people crossing the border illegally. He also said that the Boy Scouts of America praised him in a conversation over the phone for having for performing such an impactful and emotional speech. And then things got sort of weird because the president of Mexico said, we never had that phone call conversation, and the Boy Scouts of America issued an apology for what many characterize as a politicized speech. What do you make of what's going on, these misstatements by the president? What's the impact?
Sure. Well, what I hear is a president who, when he comes under criticism for saying or doing something publicly, his defense is, well, the people that I said or did it to really liked it. And so what I heard him say is, listen, the president of the Boy Scouts called me and said it was the greatest speech he'd ever heard. The Mexican president said, folded to some of my demands in that phone call. That's not the case, as we heard from the White House, and this is kind of upside down day where the White House admits that the president said something that didn't turn out to be true. I think in terms of impact, the more that the president is discredited in terms of his words, the less of a relationship he has with Congress and the growing percentage of America, some say 65%, that give him a disapproval rating. It's not helpful to be the president of the United States and just get kind of caught up in not being truthful about small details, like whether you called someone or had an in-person conversation.
Right, indeed. Amber Phillips of the Washington Post, always a pleasure talking to you, Amber.
Thank you.